What is pollination? Today we are going to read all the way through Bees Are Best. What is pollen? Pollen is the yellow, white, or brown powder at the center of most flowers. Pollen is an important food for bees and some other animals. The bee on the left is covered in pollen. Bees collect pollen in pollen sacs. An important part of flowers. Pollen is a very important part of many flowers. It is the part of a flower that plants need to make fruit, seeds, and new plants. To make new plants, pollen has to move from one flower part to another of the same kind of flower. Most flowers need pollinators to move their pollen. Pollinators are animals such as bees, wasps, butterflies, and other small animals that visit flowers. This beetle has pollen all over its body. When it goes to another flower of the same kind, it will leave pollen on the flower. The flower will be able to make seeds. What is pollination? Some flowers have male and female parts. The stamen is the male part of the plant that makes pollen. Some flowers have one stamen and others have many. The pistil is the female part of the flower. It is made up of the style, stigma, and ovary. The stigma is the top part. It receives the pollen. The style is the pollen tube. The pollen travels down through the style to the ovary. The ovary contains ovules. How a plant grows. When pollen moves from a stamen to a stigma, pollination has taken place. After a flower is pollinated, its petals fall off. The ovaries of the flowers become fruit, and the ovules become seeds. The fruit of a plant can be a vegetable or nut as well as fruit. The fruit of the bean plant below are the bean pods. The seeds are the beans inside the pods. Bees are pollinating the flower of a bean plant. After pollination, the ovaries of the flower become bean pods. Beans inside are the seeds that can make new plants. Types of pollination. Flowers cannot make seeds unless they are pollinated. There are three main types of pollination: cross-pollination, self-pollination, and wind pollination. In cross-pollination, flowers need pollen from other flowers of the same species or type to land on their pistils. Animals such as insects, birds, carry pollen from flower to flower. This bee is cross-pollinating. It is carrying pollen from one flower to another of the same kind. Self-pollination. During self-pollination, pollen moves from the stamen to the pistil of the same flower. Flowers that self-pollinate have male and female parts that are close together, so the pollen can move easily from the stamen to the pistil. Some flowers can self-pollinate or be cross-pollinated. Wind pollination. Some flowers are pollinated by wind. Wind sweeps the pollen off those flowers and carries it to other flowers. Wind-pollinated flowers have millions of tiny pollen grains. These flowers seldom have nectar. Ragweed flowers are wind-pollinated. Many people are very allergic to ragweed pollen. Shapes and colors. Most animals pollinate when they look for nectar. Nectar is a liquid found in many flowers. The bright colors of sweet smell of a flower tells pollinators that the flower contains nectar or pollen for them to eat. Flowers that are pollinated at night may have very strong scents to make it easier for pollinators to find them. The Luna moth is a beautiful nighttime pollinator. Orchids have special markings that guide insects into their nectar. A paper kite butterfly is pollinating an orchid. The jack in the pulpit plant does not smell sweet. In fact, it smells like dead meat. This plant attracts flies to pollinate it. Hummingbirds have long beaks and very long tongues. They are able to feed at flowers that are too deep or thin for other pollinators to reach. Do we need pollinators? Do you know that more than 1/3 of the food you eat depends on pollinators? Pollinators make plants healthier so they can make a lot of food. There are thousands of kinds of pollinators. Most vegetables, fruits, and nuts come from plants that were pollinated by insects, birds, bats, and other small animals. Cherries, apples and pears, blueberries, all kinds of nuts, raspberries, kiwi fruit, chocolate and hazelnuts, and many kinds of vegetables. All these foods, the food shown on this page and many more, come from plants that were pollinated by insects and other animals. Insect pollinators. There are thousands of kinds of insects that pollinate plants. They belong to 5 main groups: bees, wasps, butterflies and moths, flies and beetles. Without these insects, we would not have many of the foods we eat. Bees, wasps, moth, butterfly, flies, beetles. Bees are best. There are thousands of kinds of bees, but the honeybee is the most important pollinator. Honeybees are social insects. Social insects live together in groups called colonies. Each bee colony lives in a hive, which is its home. Bees collect nectar and pollen from flowers. They pollinate many kinds of fruit trees as well as vegetable plants. They also make honey, which people eat. This is a bee on an apple tree. Bumblebees. The bumblebee is another kind of bee pollinator. There are about 250 species of bumblebees. Bumblebees have big furry bodies. Like honeybees, these bees live in colonies of 150 to 200 bees. Bumblebees make their nests underground. The tongue of some bumblebees are short and others are long. The long-tongued bees are important pollinators for many plants, such as beans, tomatoes, and clover.